The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Clearwater Junction, painting the ramshackle buildings in shades of rust and amber. Sam Morrison dismounted his bay mare outside the livery stable, his boots stirring up small clouds of red dust that hung in the still air like suspended time. The town sat at the edge of nowhere, a collection of weathered structures huddled against the vast emptiness of the Arizona Territory, watched over by distant mountains that rose like ancient sentinels against the pale sky. Sam had ridden hard for 3 days from the mining camps up north, his saddlebags heavy with the last of his gold dust, $300 worth, enough to buy a small herd of horses and start fresh somewhere green, somewhere that didn't taste of alkali and broken dreams. Montana. Maybe. He'd heard tell of valleys up there where the grass grew tall enough to brush a horse's belly, where a man could build something that lasted. The Silver Dollar Saloon squatted on the corner like a toad. Its painted sign faded to illegibility. Sam led his horse to the water trough, planning to wet his throat before finding a bed for the night. But as he approached, a commotion near the saloon's side entrance caught his attention. A crowd had gathered, maybe 20 men, forming a rough circle. Their voices carried on the hot wind catcalls, laughter, the ugly sound of sport being made at someone's expense. Sam had learned long ago to mind his own business in towns like this. He'd seen enough trouble in his 30-odd years to know when to walk away. But something in the quality of the crowd's excitement, something predatory and wrong, made him edge closer. At the center of the circle stood Josiah Blackwood, a man Sam recognized by reputation, if not by sight. The moneylender cut an imposing figure in his black broadcloth suit, incongruous in the dust and squalor. His face was fleshy and pale, the face of a man who profited from others' misfortune while keeping his own hands clean. Beside him, 2 hired guns lounged with studied casualness, their hands never far from their holsters. But it was the figure at Blackwood's feet that made Sam's jaw tighten. A young woman knelt in the dust, her wrists bound with iron shackles that had rubbed raw wounds into her skin. Her dress, once blue calico, was torn and stained. Her feet were bare and bleeding, leaving crimson prints in the dirt. Auburn hair, tangled and matted with dust, partially obscured her face. "Gentlemen," Blackwood's voice oiled across the crowd, "I present to you an opportunity. This girl owes me $300, a debt inherited from her recently deceased mother. Unable to pay, she's agreed to work off her obligation through a contract of indentured service. I'm willing to transfer that contract to any man here willing to assume the debt." The crowd stirred. Someone whistled. "How long's the contract for?" a voice called out. 7 years, Blackwood replied smoothly. "She's young, strong, can cook, clean, work a garden, knows her letters and numbers too, if you have need of such things." Sam felt bile rise in his throat. He'd heard of such arrangements. Debt bondage, they called it, though it was slavery by another name. Legal, perhaps, in the twisted logic of frontier justice, but wrong all the same. "I'll give $60, a blacksmith called out, eyeing the girl like livestock. "70, countered another man. The girl hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, but now she lifted her head, and Sam found himself looking into eyes the color of deep water, blue-green like the sea he'd once glimpsed in California. Those eyes swept the crowd with a desperation that cut through the afternoon heat like a blade. They found Sam's face and held there, seeming to recognize something in him that he wasn't sure he recognized in himself. Her lips moved, forming words too quiet for the crowd to hear. But Sam had learned to read lips during the war, when cannon fire stole men's voices, and he understood her plea as clearly as if she'd shouted it. "Please don't leave me. Take me away." $90. The blacksmith raised his bid. Stepping forward, his thick hands flexed unconsciously, and something cold and final settled in Sam's gut. He heard his own voice before he'd made the conscious decision to speak. $200. The crowd turned to stare. Blackwood's pale eyes narrowed, taking in Sam's trail-worn appearance, the dust on his clothes, the weathered grip of the Colt at his hip. "Do you have such a stranger?" Blackwood asked, his tone suggesting he doubted it. Sam reached into his coat and withdrew the leather pouch that held his future. 300, cash money, today." A murmur ran through the crowd. The girl's eyes widened. Something flickering there, hope, perhaps, or disbelief. Blackwood's fleshy lips curved into what might have been a smile. Well, it seems we have a serious bidder, going once at $300. "Take it," Sam said flatly, "or I walk." The moneylender studied him for a long moment, then nodded to one of his men. "Release her." The hired gun produced a key and unlocked the shackles. They fell to the ground with a sound like breaking chains. The girl swayed on her feet, and Sam stepped forward, shrugging out of his coat to drape it around her shoulders. She was smaller than he'd thought, the top of her head barely reaching his shoulder. "The contract." Blackwood produced a document from his vest pocket. "Sign here, and she's yours." Sam took the paper, scanning it quickly. Legal enough, he supposed, though the whole business turned his stomach. He signed with a steady hand, then counted out the gold dust under Blackwood's watchful eye. "A pleasure doing business," Blackwood said, tucking the pouch away. His smile was sharp as broken glass. "Though I wonder if you know what you've purchased. Stranger, this one's got spirit. Her mother thought she could cheat me too. Unfortunate. What happened to her? Accidents do happen on the frontier." The girl stiffened against Sam's side, but said nothing. "We're done here," Sam said. He turned to go, one hand on the girl's elbow to steady her. "Morrison," Blackwood's voice stopped him. Sam turned back. Unsurprised the man knew his name. Men like Blackwood made it their business to know things. "You'll regret this, I promise you that." Sam touched the brim of his hat in mock salute. "I've regretted plenty in my life. One more won't kill me." He guided the girl away from the crowd, feeling their eyes like brands on his back. The sun was sinking toward the mountains now, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. As they walked, Sam wondered what the hell he'd just done, and why. $300, his new life, his fresh start. Gone in a moment of, what conscience foolishness. The girl stumbled, and he caught her arm. "Hotel's just ahead," he said gruffly. "Can you make it?" She nodded, finding her voice at last. "Thank you." The words were cracked and dry, but underneath he heard the faint lilt of Ireland, softened by years in the American desert. At Morrison's Hotel, no relation. Despite the name, Sam paid for 2 rooms and arranged for hot water to be sent up. The clerk's knowing look made his jaw clench, but he said nothing. Let them think what they would. In the small dining room, he ordered beef stew and cornbread, coffee, and plenty of water. The girl ate slowly at first, then with increasing appetite, color returning to her pale cheeks, clean of dust and blood. Her face revealed itself, young, maybe 20, with strong features that spoke of hardship endured and survived. "What's your name?" Sam asked finally. "Margaret," she replied. "Margaret O'Brien, though she didn't need to say who, called me Maggie. I hated it." "Margaret, then—" Sam pushed the coffee pot toward her. "You want to tell me what this is really about, that debt? Was it real?" Her jaw tightened. "As real as any of Blackwood's debts. My mother borrowed $50 to pay for medicine when the fever came through last winter. By spring, with his interest, it was 100. By summer, 200, when she couldn't pay." Margaret's voice trailed off. "The accident," Sam said, "she fell down the stairs at our boarding house. Broke her neck. Very unfortunate. The sheriff said, no witnesses." Margaret's hands wrapped around the coffee cup as if drawing warmth from it. "The next day, Blackwood came for me, said the debt passed to me, plus fees for collection. $300. When I couldn't pay, he offered me a choice, the contract or he'd sell the debt to certain men who run houses down in Mexico. Sam felt his hands clench into fists beneath the table. Your father, dead these 5 years. Mining accident. She laughed, short and bitter. We seem prone to accidents, the O'Briens, any other family. Her eyes dropped. My brother, Daniel, he's 12. When Blackwood took me, he kept Daniel as insurance. He said to make sure I didn't run. Her voice broke slightly. He's at Blackwood's ranch, working in the stables. I don't even know if he's alive, Sam said firmly. Blackwood's too smart to throw away leverage. He made a decision, swift as drawing a gun. Where's this ranch? West, 2 days' ride, near Skeleton Canyon. She looked up at him, those sea-colored eyes bright with unshed tears. You don't have to. You've done enough. More than enough. Sam leaned back in his chair, studying her. In the lamplight, he could see the steel beneath the exhaustion, the core of strength that had kept her upright in that circle of leering men. I had a sister once, he said quietly. Sarah. Fever took her when she was 15. I was away, fighting in the war, couldn't protect her, can't fix that now. Understanding dawned in Margaret's face. But this isn't your fight. It is now. Sam stood, tossing coins on the table for the meal. Get some rest. We leave at first light. For where? To get your brother. And then, he paused, thinking of Montana's green valleys, now seeming farther away than ever. Then we'll see. As he turned to go, her hand caught his sleeve. Why? She asked. Really, why would you do this? Sam looked down at her fingers on his arm, then up to her face. Because when you looked at me in that crowd, you weren't looking for a master or an owner. You were looking for a human being. Been a while since anyone looked at me like that. He left her there, heading for his own room. Outside, night was falling over Clearwater Junction, bringing with it the distant howl of coyotes and the nearer sounds of saloon revelry. Sam sat on the narrow bed, cleaning his Colt by lamplight, planning tomorrow's route. Blackwood would come after them. Men like him didn't forgive public humiliation. They'd need supplies, ammunition, water for the desert crossing. His gold was gone, his plans scattered like dust, but for the first time in years, Sam Morrison felt something other than emptiness. Purpose, maybe, or perhaps just the simple human satisfaction of seeing chains fall away, of answering a plea that should never have needed to be made. Through the thin walls, he heard movement in the next room. Margaret preparing for bed. Tomorrow would bring pursuit, danger, probably gunplay. But tonight, she was safe. It was a small thing, maybe, in the vast indifference of the frontier. But it was something. Sam blew out the lamp and lay back fully clothed, one hand on his gun. In the darkness, her words echoed. Please don't leave me. Take me away. He'd taken her away from one danger, straight into another. But at least now she was running towards something instead of being sold like cattle. That had to count for something. In this hard land, sometimes that was all that counted. The coyotes sang their lonesome song to the stars, and Sam Morrison closed his eyes, knowing that, come morning, his life would never be the same. The eastern sky showed the first pale hints of dawn when Sam knocked softly on Margaret's door. She emerged already dressed, her face wan but determined in the gray light. He'd found her a pair of sturdy boots and a wide-brimmed hat at the general store, paying with the last of his pocket money. Can you ride? He asked as they made their way to the livery stable. Well enough, she replied, then added with a ghost of a smile, though I learned on Irish ponies, not these American giants. Sam had purchased a second horse during the night, a sturdy paint mare with intelligent eyes and steady temperament. He helped Margaret mount, noting how she handled the reins with quiet competence despite her obvious exhaustion. They rode out of Clearwater Junction as the sun broke the horizon, casting long shadows across the desert floor. The town's few early risers watched them go with knowing looks. By noon, Sam figured, Blackwood would know exactly which direction they'd taken. The desert opened before them like a vast book written in languages of stone and sand. Saguaro cacti stood like exclamation points against the pale sky, while clusters of ocotillo raised thorny fingers toward the climbing sun. The heat came on gradually, then all at once, transforming the air into a shimmering wall. They rode in companionable silence for the first hour, Sam setting a pace that covered ground without exhausting the horses. He found himself stealing glances at Margaret, noting how she sat straight despite her fatigue, how her eyes constantly scanned the horizon. She had the watchfulness of someone who'd learned not to trust the world's kindness. "Tell me about Daniel," Sam said eventually, partly to break the silence and partly to keep her mind off the grueling ride ahead. Margaret's face softened. "He's clever, too clever for his own good sometimes. Loves books, used to read anything he could get his hands on. Mother saved pennies to buy him a dictionary for Christmas last year." Her voice caught slightly. "He wants to be a lawyer. Says he'll defend people who can't defend themselves." "Sounds like he's got the makings," Sam observed. "If he survives Blackwood's ranch." The softness vanished, replaced by steel. They worked those boys hard, dawn to dusk in the stables and fields. And Blackwood's foreman, Luther Grant. She trailed off, jaw tightening. Sam knew the type. Men who enjoyed having power over those who couldn't fight back. His hand drifted unconsciously to his Colt. Some problems, he'd learned, had simple solutions. By midday, the heat had become a living thing, pressing down on them like a physical weight. They stopped in the meager shade of a rock outcropping to rest the horses and share water from Sam's canteens. Margaret rationed herself carefully, wetting her lips rather than drinking deeply. "Where'd you learn that?" Sam asked. "The crossing from Ireland." She replied, 6 weeks on a ship with barely enough water for half the passengers. You learn, or you die." As they prepared to ride on, Sam caught movement in the distance, a dust plume rising against the southern horizon, too far to make out details, but moving in their general direction. "Company," he said quietly. Margaret followed his gaze, her face paling beneath the shade of her hat. "Already?" "Maybe, maybe not. A lot of folks travel this road." But Sam didn't believe in coincidences. He adjusted their route, angling toward a series of low hills that would offer better cover. The afternoon stretched endless, the sun a brass hammer beating against the anvil of the earth. They pushed the horses as hard as they dared, stopping only to switch mounts and let them blow. Sam had chosen their path carefully, avoiding the main wagon road in favor of older trails, paths used by Apache raiders and Mexican smugglers before the coming of the railroad changed everything. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, they reached Box Canyon, a narrow defile cut by ancient waters through red sandstone. A thin stream still trickled along its bottom, feeding a few cottonwoods that offered blessed shade. "We'll camp here tonight," Sam decided, studying the canyon's defensive possibilities. One way in, one way out, but the high walls would hide their fire and give them warning of any approach. Margaret slid from her saddle with a barely suppressed groan. Her dress was soaked with sweat, her face flushed with heat and exertion, but she immediately began gathering firewood without complaint, moving with the determined efficiency of someone who'd learned that self-pity was a luxury she couldn't afford. As Sam tended the horses, he found himself impressed by her quiet competence. She built the fire small and smokeless, positioned rocks to reflect heat while screening light, arranged their meager camp with an eye to quick departure if needed. These weren't skills learned in a day. "You've done this before," he observed. "Father was a surveyor before he took to mining," she explained. "When I was young, before Daniel was born, he'd take me on his jobs. Said a woman should know how to take care of herself. That America wasn't Ireland, where you could walk from town to town in a day. A sad smile touched her lips. He was right about that. They ate a simple meal of jerky and hardtack, washed down with coffee boiled strong enough to float a horseshoe. As darkness settled over the canyon, bringing blessed coolness, they sat on opposite sides of the fire, each lost in thought. "Why gold mining?" Margaret asked suddenly. "You don't seem the type." Sam considered the question, poking at the fire with a stick. "Seemed like a good idea after the war. A lot of us thought we'd strike it rich. Build something new out of all that destruction. Spent 5 years grubbing in the dirt. Found just enough to keep hoping, never enough to quit." He laughed, short and bitter. "Should have quit anyway. Would have, if I hadn't seen you in that crowd." The fire crackled between them. In the distance, a coyote called to its pack, the sound lonely and wild. "I'm glad you didn't quit," Margaret said softly. "But I'm sorry it cost you everything." "Not everything." Sam met her eyes across the flames. "A man can always make more money, can't always make a difference." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Tell me about the war. Which side?" "Union, 14th Indiana Infantry." The memories came unbidden, smoke and thunder, the screams of horses and men. Fields of wheat turned to fields of blood. 3 years, Antietam, Gettysburg, the March to the Sea. Came out the other side wondering what the hell any of it had been for. "To end slavery," Margaret said simply. "That's what they told us, and maybe it did, on paper, but men like Blackwood just found new words for old evils." Sam stood abruptly, checking his rifle. "I'll take first watch, get some sleep." But sleep eluded them both. Sam sat with his back to a boulder, watching the canyon entrance, while behind him Margaret tossed restlessly on her blanket. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human struggles below. Near midnight, he heard her sit up. "Can't sleep." "I keep thinking about Daniel," she admitted. "What if Blackwood? What if he takes it out on him because I ran—" Sam turned to face her. In the moonlight, her face was pale as porcelain, marked by shadows of fear and exhaustion. "We're not running," he said firmly. "We're advancing in a different direction. There's a difference." Despite everything, she smiled. "Is that what they taught you in the Army?" "That's what kept me alive in the Army." He moved to sit closer, still watching the canyon but near enough to offer comfort by presence alone. "Tell me about him. Not to worry, tell me something good." Margaret wrapped her arms around her knees, making herself small. "He sings, has a voice like an angel, though he'd die of embarrassment if he heard me say it. On Sundays, if Blackwood's away, the hands let the boys rest. Daniel would sing the old songs, Irish ballads our father taught us. Even the hardest men would stop to listen." "What's his favorite?" "The Parting Glass. Father used to sing it when—" She stopped, swallowing hard. "The night before he went to the mine for the last time, he sang it, as if he knew." They sat in silence for a while, each carrying their own ghosts. Then Sam said, "When we get him out, and we will get him out, where will you go?" "I hadn't thought that far away, somewhere Blackwood can't reach." She looked at him sideways. "What about your Montana dream?" "Still there. Land's not going anywhere." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Could use help building it. 3 pairs of hands work better than 1. Before she could respond, a sound made them both freeze. The distant clatter of hooves on stone. Sam was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. "Get the horses ready," he whispered, quietly. But the sound faded, moving away down the valley, some other traveler in the night, or Blackwood's men missing their trail in the darkness. They stood for long minutes, listening, before Sam finally relaxed. "False alarm, but we should move at first light anyway." Margaret nodded, then surprised him by touching his arm. "Sam, whatever happens tomorrow or the day after, thank you for seeing me as a person, for caring what happens to a stranger." "You're not a stranger anymore," he said quietly. Dawn came too soon, bringing with it the promise of another day's brutal heat. They broke camp swiftly, erasing signs of their presence. As they led the horses from the canyon, Sam spotted fresh tracks in the sand. 4 riders had passed in the night, heading west. "Blackwood's men?" Margaret asked, reading his expression. "Maybe, or maybe cowboys heading to market. Either way, we need to be careful." They rode through the morning, paralleling the main trail but staying to rougher country. The landscape changed gradually, red sand giving way to gray rock, scattered juniper appearing among the cacti. By noon, they could see the dark smudge of mountains ahead, the edge of Blackwood's domain. It was then that Sam spotted the dust plume again, closer now, definitely following their general direction. He made a quick decision, pointing to a cluster of rocks ahead. "We're going to ground now." They pushed the horses hard for the rocks, reaching cover just as the dust resolved into riders. 6 men, moving with purpose. Sam ground-hitched the horses and found a vantage point, Margaret beside him. "Can you shoot?" he asked, passing her his spare revolver. "Father taught me, but I've never shot at a person. With luck, you won't have to. Sometimes showing you're willing is enough." But the riders passed below without stopping, and Sam got a good look at the leader, a man he recognized from Clearwater Junction. One of Blackwood's hired guns. They were definitely being hunted. "They're heading for Wilson's trading post," Margaret whispered. "It's the only water for 20 miles. They think we'll have to stop there." "Then we won't." Sam studied the terrain, memory mapping the country he'd crossed years before. "There's another way, harder but possible. Apache Springs, up in the mountains. If we can reach it." "That's sacred ground. The Apache." "Argonne, moved to the reservation 2 years ago." Sam's voice was grim. "Another kind of theft, but it might save us now." They waited until the riders were well past, then emerged from cover. The detour would add miles to their journey, take them through brutal country, but it would also bring them to Blackwood's ranch from an unexpected direction. As they rode toward the mountains, Margaret asked, "Do you believe in fate?" "I believe in choices," Sam replied. "Why?" "Because I keep thinking, of all the people in that crowd, why did I look at you? Why did you answer?" She shook her head. "My mother would have said it was God's hand." "And what do you say?" She was quiet for a long moment. "I say that sometimes, when everything seems lost. Hope has a face, and yesterday it had yours." They climbed into the foothills as the sun reached its zenith, the horses laboring up steep trails meant for deer and bighorn sheep. Behind them, the desert spread out like a rumpled blanket, and somewhere in that vastness, men with guns searched for them. But ahead lay Daniel, and beyond that, perhaps, a future neither of them had dared imagine. Sam glanced at Margaret, seeing how she sat straight despite exhaustion, how her jaw set with determination. He'd lost his gold, his plans, his careful solitude, but riding beside this remarkable woman toward an uncertain tomorrow, he couldn't bring himself to regret it. The mountain embraced them with its shadows and silence, and they climbed on. 2 souls bound by circumstance and choice, carrying between them the fragile, stubborn hope that sometimes, against all odds, decent people could win. Apache Springs appeared like a miracle in the harsh landscape, a hidden oasis where water seeped from ancient rocks to form a small pool surrounded by cottonwoods and willows. Sam had heard of it from an old prospector years ago, but had never had reason to seek it out until now. The springs lay in a natural bowl of red rock, invisible until you were almost upon it. "Thank God," Margaret breathed as they descended the narrow trail. The horses, smelling water, picked up their pace despite their exhaustion. Sam remained watchful even as relief washed over him. Places like this drew all manner of creatures, 2-legged and 4, but the spring was deserted save for the tracks of deer and javelina in the mud. They let the horses drink first, slowly to avoid colic, while Sam filled their canteens and Margaret washed the trail dust from her face and hands. The water was cool and sweet, tasting of stone and thyme. "We'll rest here a few hours," Sam decided, studying the sun's position. "Push on after dark. Blackwood's ranch is maybe 15 miles northwest, and coming from this direction, they won't expect us." Margaret nodded, sinking gratefully onto a flat rock in the shade. She pulled off her boots with a small groan, revealing blisters that had broken and bled. Without a word, Sam dug into his saddlebags for the small medical kit he carried, a habit from the war that had saved his life more than once. "Let me see," he said, kneeling before her. "It's nothing," she protested, but he was already examining her feet with gentle, competent hands. Nothing has a way of becoming something out here. He cleaned the wounds with water from the spring, applied salve, and wrapped them with strips torn from his spare shirt. "Should have said something sooner. We had bigger worries." She watched him work, something unreadable in her expression. "You've done this before. Field hospital, after Chancellorsville, ran out of surgeons, so they pressed anyone with steady hands into service." He tied off the last bandage. "Learned more than I wanted to know about what people can endure." "And what they can't?" Sam looked up, meeting her steady gaze. "That too." They made a cold camp, not daring a fire that might draw attention. As the afternoon heat peaked, even the shade felt oppressive. Sam spread his bedroll for Margaret to rest on while he kept watch, but sleep eluded her. "Tell me about Blackwood's ranch," he said. "Everything you remember." Margaret closed her eyes, calling up memories. "The main house sits on a rise, adobe walls thick as a fortress. Blackwood likes to see everything from his windows. He's got a telescope on the upper floor. The bunkhouse, where he keeps the workers, is to the east, near the stables. That's where Daniel would be. Guards. Always two at the main gate, usually another walking the grounds at night, more if he's expecting trouble." She opened her eyes. "He'll be expecting trouble now." "Good. Expectation makes men nervous, and nervous men make mistakes." Sam sketched in the dirt with a stick. The approach from this direction: rocky ground, then open pasture for maybe 300 yards to the buildings. There's a dry wash that runs close to the stables. Daniel mentioned it once. Said the boys sometimes sneak out that way to catch lizards when the guards aren't watching. Sam studied his rough map, mind working through possibilities. A frontal assault was suicide, but if they could reach the stables unseen, extract Daniel quietly, there's something else. Margaret said quietly, "Blackwood keeps papers in his office, contracts, debts, records of his business dealings. If those were to disappear, or better yet, reach the federal marshal in Tucson." "One thing at a time. We get Daniel first." "No." Her voice carried unexpected steel. "We do both, or Blackwood just starts again with other families, other children." Sam looked at her, really looked, beneath the exhaustion and fear. He saw something that reminded him of the women who'd kept farms running while their men fought the war, who'd faced down deserters and bushwhackers with nothing but determination and a shotgun. "All right," he said, "both, but Daniel first." As the sun slanted low, painting the rocks in shades of copper and gold, they prepared to move. Sam checked weapons, counting ammunition. Margaret rebandaged her feet and pulled on her boots, biting her lip against the pain. They were saddling the horses when Sam heard it, a sound that didn't belong. He held up a hand for silence, listening. There, the clink of metal on stone, still distant but coming closer. "Mount up," he said quietly. "Now." They led the horses up the opposite side of the bowl, away from the approaching sound. Just as they crested the rim, Sam glanced back to see two riders entering the springs. Not Blackwood's men. Apache scouts from the look of them, probably working for the army. but their presence meant the springs were less secret than he'd hoped. They rode into the gathering dusk, angling northwest through country that grew increasingly rough. The mountains gave way to broken badlands, a maze of arroyos and mesas that would confuse pursuit, but also made navigation tricky. Margaret rode without complaint, despite her injured feet. But Sam could see the strain in how she held herself. When they stopped to rest the horses, he noticed her counting stars under her breath, a habit, he realized. That helped her stay calm. 57, she said, catching his look. My father taught me the constellations. Said if you could read the stars, you'd never truly be lost. And are you lost? She considered the question. I was. For months after Mother died, I felt like I was drowning in the dark. Then you appeared. A small smile touched her lips. Maybe I'm finally learning to swim. They reached the edge of Blackwood's domain near midnight. The ranch spread below them, a collection of buildings that looked deceptively peaceful in the moonlight. Lamplight glowed in the main house's windows, Blackwood keeping late hours. Sam studied the layout through his field glasses, a prize from a Confederate officer at 5 Forks. Everything was much as Margaret had described, though she'd failed to mention the new barbed wire fence surrounding the workers' quarters. That's recent, she whispered, seeing his frown. Since I left. Barbed wire changed things. It was noisy to cut, impossible to cross quickly. But the dry wash she'd mentioned was still accessible, a dark snake winding toward the stables. We leave the horses here, Sam decided. Move in on foot, if things go bad. He pressed his spare revolver into her hands. You take the paint and ride hard for Millfield. Find the federal judge there. Edison Brennan, tell him everything. I'm not leaving without you and Daniel. Margaret. No. Her voice was quiet, but implacable. We finish this together, or not at all. Sam wanted to argue, but recognized the futility. In her place, he'd have said the same. They made their way down the slope, using every shadow, every fold of ground. The wash was shallow but adequate, its sandy bottom muffling their footsteps. Halfway to the buildings, they froze as a guard passed. Rifle carried carelessly over his shoulder. He paused to light a cigarette, the match flare momentarily blinding him, then moved on. The stable loomed ahead, dark and quiet, save for the occasional stamp of a horse. Sam touched Margaret's shoulder, pointed to the shadow by the wall. She nodded. Understanding. He'd go in alone first. Find Daniel, then signal her. The stable door was barred but not locked. Why secure horses that had nowhere to run? Sam lifted the bar slowly, wincing at every small sound. Inside, the familiar smell of hay and horses enveloped him. He moved down the line of stalls, eyes adjusting to the deeper darkness. A sound made him freeze, soft breathing from the hayloft above. He climbed the ladder carefully, hand on his knife. In the loft, illuminated by moonlight through a gap in the roof, 6 boys slept on thin pallets. They looked younger than their years, worn down by hard labor and poor food. Sam found Daniel by his resemblance to Margaret, the same auburn hair, the same determined chin even in sleep. He knelt beside the boy, placed a gentle hand over his mouth before shaking him awake. Daniel's eyes flew open, wide with fear that transformed to confusion as he took in Sam's unfamiliar face. I'm a friend of Margaret's, Sam whispered. She's outside. We've come to take you home. The boy's eyes filled with tears he was too proud to shed. He nodded, immediately beginning to gather his few possessions, a battered book, a carved wooden horse, a shirt that had seen better days. The others, Daniel whispered, gesturing to his sleeping companions. Sam's heart clenched. He couldn't take them all. Not tonight, but tell them to be ready. Change is coming. They descended the ladder, Daniel moving with the quiet grace of someone who'd learned to be invisible. Outside, Margaret waited in the shadows. When she saw her brother, A soft cry escaped her lips. The siblings embraced fiercely, silently, a reunion that needed no words. "The papers," Margaret whispered after a moment. "Blackwood's office." Sam wanted to refuse, to take what they'd won and run, but he saw the determination in her eyes, the need to strike a real blow against the man who'd destroyed her family, and Daniel, young as he was, nodded agreement. "Where?" Sam asked. "Second floor of the main house," Daniel supplied. "He keeps them in a strongbox behind a painting of a bull. I've seen it when I served dinner to his guests." It was madness, but sometimes madness was just another word for justice. "Wait in the wash," Sam ordered. "If I'm not back in 20 minutes. "We'll come after you," Margaret finished. Sam looked between the siblings, so alike in their stubbornness, and accepted his fate. "Watch for my signal. 2 flashes means run. 3 means all clear." He made his way toward the main house, every nerve singing with tension. The ground floor windows were dark, but light still showed upstairs. A guard dozed on the front porch, whiskey bottle at his feet. Sam circled to the back, where a trellis supported dying roses. It looked sturdy enough to hold his weight. He climbed carefully, thorns tearing at his hands, until he reached a second-floor window. Through the glass, he could see an empty hallway. The window was latched but not secured. A thin blade slipped between the sashes, and he was in. The house smelled of cigars and furniture polish, the scent of ill-gotten wealth. Sam moved down the hallway, testing doors until he found what was clearly an office-heavy desk, leather chairs, and yes, a painting of a bull on the far wall. He was reaching for the painting when footsteps sounded in the hall. No time to hide. Sam pressed himself against the wall beside the door, hand on his knife. The door opened. Blackwood entered, carrying a lamp and a ledger. He set them on the desk, then froze as he sensed another presence. "Who's there?" Sam stepped out, Colt drawn. "Evening, Blackwood." The man's fleshy face went pale, then flushed with anger. "Morrison, I should have known. Where's the girl?" "Far from here, along with your workforce from the stable." Blackwood's eyes darted to a bell pull on the wall, a summons for his guards. Sam shook his head. "Don't! You'll be dead before they reach the stairs." "You won't shoot. Too much noise." "Try me." They stood frozen, each calculating odds. Then Blackwood smiled, the expression chilling. "You're too late, you know. I've already sent word to my associates in Mexico. That boy will fetch a good price in the copper mines. They're always looking for small hands to work the narrow shafts." Sam's finger tightened on the trigger, but he forced himself to remain calm. Blackwood was lying, trying to provoke him. The man's tell was obvious. He touched his collar when he lied. A nervous habit Margaret had mentioned. "Open the strongbox," Sam ordered. "I don't have the key." Sam fired, the bullet passing so close to Blackwood's ear that the man felt its wind. "The next one won't miss. Open it." With shaking hands, Blackwood removed the painting and worked the combination. The box contained what Margaret had promised: ledgers, contracts, correspondence that painted a picture of corruption and cruelty. Sam grabbed it all, stuffing papers into a canvas sack he'd brought for the purpose. "You're a dead man," Blackwood hissed. "I have friends. Influence." "You have nothing," Sam interrupted. "Because after tonight, everyone will know what you are. A man who preys on children and the desperate, the kind of vermin decent folks scrape off their boots." Footsteps pounded up the stairs. The shot had been heard. Sam backed toward the window. "Give my regards to the federal judge. I hear they're particular about fraudulent debt contracts these days." He was through the window and sliding down the trellis as shouts erupted inside. His boots hit the ground hard, and he ran for the wash, guards spilling from the bunkhouse behind him. Margaret and Daniel were mounted and ready, holding the reins of his bay. Sam vaulted into the saddle as bullets whined overhead. They spurred their horses up the wash, hooves throwing sand as more shots rang out. But darkness was their ally, and confusion their friend. By the time Blackwood's men organized pursuit, they were beyond rifle range, racing across the desert toward the mountains and freedom. They rode hard through the remaining darkness, not stopping until the sun rose behind them. When Sam finally called a halt, they could see dust in the distance. Pursuit was coming, but they had a good lead. "The papers?" Margaret asked. Sam patted the sack tied to his saddle. "All there. Enough to hang him. Legally speaking." Daniel spoke for the first time since their escape. "The other boys, you said change was coming." "It is," Sam promised. "We're taking these papers to Judge Brennan in Millfield. He's known for being incorruptible. Once he sees what Blackwood's been doing." "Justice," Margaret finished softly. "Real justice." They rode on as the morning heated up. 3 figures against the vastness of the desert. Behind them lay captivity and cruelty. Ahead waited uncertainty, danger, but also hope. And sometimes, Sam reflected, hope was enough to build a future on. The sun climbed mercilessly as they pushed deeper into the Badlands. 3 riders racing against time and pursuit. Sam led them through a landscape that seemed torn from the earth's fevered dreams. Red rock formations twisted into impossible shapes. Narrow canyons that opened suddenly into vast plateaus. And always the relentless heat that turned the air into a shimmering curtain. By mid-morning, the dust cloud behind them had grown larger, resolving into distinct plumes. Sam counted at least 8 riders. Maybe more. Blackwood had sent his best hunters, and they were gaining ground. "There!" Sam pointed to a narrow defile between 2 massive red rocks. "We make our stand there." Margaret looked at him sharply. "Stand. Can't outrun them forever. Horses are already blown." He guided them into the natural fortress, assessing angles and cover. But 3 rifles in good position can hold off 20 in a place like this. They dismounted, and Sam positioned them carefully. Margaret at the left side, behind a fallen boulder. Daniel, who'd proven surprisingly steady on the right with Sam's spare rifle. Sam himself took the center, where he could cover both flanks. "You don't have to kill anyone," he told them quietly. "Just make them think twice about coming closer. Aim for the ground in front of them, the rocks around them. Make noise and dust." Daniel nodded solemnly, checking his rifle with movements that showed someone had taught him well. Margaret was already sighting down her barrel, face set in grim determination. They didn't have long to wait. The pursuers appeared at the canyon mouth, spread out in a ragged line. Sam recognized the lead rider, Luther Grant, Blackwood's foreman, a man with dead eyes and a reputation for cruelty. "Morrison!" Grant's voice echoed off the canyon walls. "Send out the boy and the woman. You can ride on. This ain't your fight." Sam answered with a bullet that sparked off the rocks inches from Grant's horse. The animal reared, nearly unseating its rider. "That's close enough," Sam called back. "Turn around while you still can." Grant laughed. "An ugly sound. 8 of us, 3 of you. I like those odds." "Count again," Sam replied. "You've got 8 men who work for wages. We've got 3 fighting for family. Your men will break before we do." As if to prove his point, Margaret's rifle cracked, sending another rider's hat spinning. Daniel fired a heartbeat later, his shot striking the ground between 2 horses and sending them dancing sideways. The pursuers pulled back to cover, and a tense standoff began. The sun climbed higher, turning the canyon into an oven. Sam could hear Grant trying to rally his men, promising bonuses, threatening consequences. But attacking uphill against fortified positions was a losing proposition, and everyone knew it. An hour passed, then 2. The horses suffered in the heat, and water was becoming a concern. Sam had counted on the pursuers giving up, returning to the ranch for reinforcements. But Grant was stubborn, or perhaps too afraid of Blackwood to return empty-handed. Then everything changed. A new dust cloud appeared from the east, Riders coming fast. Sam's heart sank. Reinforcements would tip the balance. But Margaret grabbed his arm, pointing. "Look at the lead rider. That's not one of Blackwood's men." She was right. The approaching group wore badges that caught the sunlight, and their leader carried a flag, the federal marshal's colors. Grant saw them too. Suddenly, attacking 3 defenders didn't seem as important as avoiding questions from federal lawmen. With shouted curses, he led his men in a rapid retreat west, back toward Blackwood's ranch. The marshals, 6 of them, approached the canyon carefully, professionally. Their leader, a weathered man with shrewd eyes, called out, "Sam Morrison, Judge Brennan sent us. Said you might need assistance." Relief flooded through Sam. "Marshal?" "Wyatt Barry. Friends call me Wyatt." The man dismounted, taking in the defensive positions with approval. "Judge got word about Blackwood's operation. Been building a case for months, but needed evidence. Heard you might have some." Sam retrieved the canvas sack, heavy with damning documents. "Everything's here. Fraudulent contracts, records of selling children into forced labor, even correspondence with buyers in Mexico." Wyatt whistled low. "This'll do more than build a case. This'll bury him." He looked at Margaret and Daniel. "You're the O'Brien family. Your testimony will be crucial." "We'll testify," Margaret said firmly, "about everything." The marshals escorted them to Millfield, a journey that took the rest of the day. As they rode, Wyatt explained how Judge Brennan had been gathering evidence against Blackwood for over a year, but witnesses had a habit of disappearing or suddenly forgetting what they'd seen. "Your escape forced his hand," Wyatt said. "Made him reckless. He sent threats to the judge this morning. In writing, the fool. Sometimes the guilty hang themselves if you give them enough rope." Millfield appeared as evening painted the sky purple and gold. Unlike Clearwater Junction's shabby desperation, this town showed signs of law and order. The streets were wide and clean, businesses prosperous, and the federal courthouse stood solid as a statement of civilization's reach into the frontier. Judge Edison Brennan met them at the courthouse, a tall, austere man with piercing blue eyes and prematurely white hair. He examined the documents by lamplight, his expression growing stonier with each page. "This is worse than I suspected," he said finally. "The man's been running a virtual slave trade under cover of legal contracts." He looked at Margaret and Daniel. "Are you prepared to testify? It won't be pleasant. Blackwood has lawyers who'll try to tear your story apart." "Let them try," Margaret replied. "We've nothing to hide and everything to gain." The judge nodded approval. "We'll quarter you in the hotel under protection. The trial starts day after tomorrow. I'm calling a special session." Word's already spreading. Every family Blackwood's cheated will want their day in court. The hotel was a revelation after days on the trail. Clean sheets, hot water, and meals that didn't come from a can. But luxury couldn't ease the tension. Through their window, Sam could see riders coming into town. Some were Blackwood's men. Others were families clutching their own fraudulent contracts, drawn by news that justice might finally be possible. That night, Sam found Margaret on the hotel's porch, watching the stars. Daniel was inside, absorbed in a book the judge had loaned him. "Scared?" Sam asked, settling beside her. "Terrified," she admitted. "But not of the trial, of what comes after, when Blackwood's gone, when the testimony's done, when—" She trailed off. "When you don't need my protection anymore." She turned to him, eyes bright in the lamplight. "Is that what you think? That I'm here because I need protection? Aren't you?" "Sam Morrison, for a smart man, you can be remarkably dense." She placed her hand over his. "I'm here because when I was at my lowest, you saw me as human, because you gave up everything to help strangers. Because—" She took a breath. "Because somewhere between Clearwater Junction and here, I started hoping we wouldn't have to say goodbye when this was over." Sam turned his hand palm up, interlacing their fingers, That ranch in Montana, still planning to build it, could use a partner who knows how to stretch supplies and handle a rifle. Just a partner. Whatever you're comfortable with, no contracts, no obligations, just possibility. Margaret smiled, the expression transforming her face. I think I'd like possibility. They sat in companionable silence, hands linked, watching the town prepare for the battle to come. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and lies, accusations and justifications, but tonight they had this, a moment of peace carved from chaos, a promise unspoken but understood. The next morning brought controlled chaos, the courthouse filled with spectators, journalists from as far as Denver, and a small army of lawyers. Blackwood arrived in chains, still wearing his expensive suit but looking diminished, his fleshy face gray with fear. The prosecutor, a young federal attorney named Theodore Roosevelt, laid out the case with methodical precision. The documents Sam had retrieved painted a damning picture, but it was the testimony that brought gasps from the gallery. Margaret took the stand first, her voice clear and unwavering as she described her mother's death, her own bondage, the threats against Daniel, when Blackwood's lawyer tried to paint her as a thief who'd invented claims to escape legitimate debt. She met his attacks with calm dignity. My mother borrowed $50, she said. By Mr. Blackwood's accounting, that became $300 in 6 months. When I asked to see the contract, I was told asking questions would add to the debt. When my mother tried to make a payment, she fell down the stairs. Very convenient. Wouldn't you say? Daniel testified next, his young voice carrying terrible weight as he described conditions at the ranch, boys as young as 8 working from dawn to dusk. Meager rations, punishment for any sign of defiance. When asked why he hadn't run away, his answer was simple. Where would we go, mister? Blackwood owns the sheriff, the mayor. He told us our families had sold us legal and proper. We believed him. Other witnesses followed. The marshal who'd investigated Margaret's mother's death admitted he'd been paid to look the other way. A banker revealed how Blackwood had forged documents to inflate debts. Family after family stood to tell their stories. A catalog of grief and exploitation that left even hardened frontiersmen shaking their heads. Sam testified last, describing the sale in Clearwater Junction, the pursuit across the desert, the night raid on Blackwood's ranch. When asked why he'd involved himself, his answer was simple: because someone had to. The defense's case crumbled within hours. Witnesses refused to testify or contradicted each other. Documents meant to prove legitimate business practices only revealed more fraud. By the time closing arguments came, Blackwood's conviction was all but certain. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. Guilty on all counts. Fraud, extortion, conspiracy, attempted murder. Judge Brennan's sentence was swift and harsh: 20 years hard labor, forfeiture of all assets, and a permanent injunction against any form of debt collection or labor contracts. As marshals led Blackwood away, he turned to glare at Sam and Margaret. "You've ruined me," he snarled. "No," Margaret replied quietly. "You ruined yourself. We just held up a mirror." Outside the courthouse, chaos erupted. Celebration from the freed families. Angry shouts from Blackwood's remaining supporters. Journalists clamoring for statements. Judge Brennan pushed through the crowd to reach them. "The ranch and all Blackwood's assets will be sold at auction," he told Margaret. "As his victims, you and the other families have the first claim on proceeds. It won't make up for what you've lost, but it's a start." "What about the other boys at the ranch?" Daniel asked. "Already taken care of. Marshal Berry's men rode out this morning. Every child has been removed and will be returned to their families or placed in proper homes." The judge's stern face softened slightly. "You did good, son. Your testimony made the difference." As the crowd began to disperse, Sam felt a hand on his shoulder. Wyatt Berry stood there, a slight smile on his weathered face. "That was fine shooting in the canyon," the marshal said. "Could use men like you in the marshal service. Pays steady. and you'd be doing work that matters. Sam glanced at Margaret, who was helping Daniel navigate the crowd. Thanks, but I've got other plans. A ranch in Montana that needs building. Wyatt followed his gaze and chuckled. I reckon that'll be work that matters too. Good luck to you. As evening approached, they found themselves back at the hotel, the weight of the day settling on them like dust. Daniel had fallen asleep over his book, exhausted by testimony and emotion. Sam carried him to bed while Margaret watched, her expression soft. It's over, she said wonderingly. It's really over. This part is... Sam agreed. The rest is just beginning. She moved to the window, looking out at the town that had given them justice. When do we leave for Montana? When you're ready, no rush now. Margaret turned to him, and he saw in her eyes the same mixture of hope and determination that had first caught him in Clearwater Junction. But now there was something more, a future taking shape, built on something stronger than desperation. I'm ready now, she said. We've spent enough time looking back. It's time to look forward. Sam crossed to her, taking her hands in his. Together. Together. Outside, the stars were beginning to appear. Same stars that had watched over their desperate flight across the desert. But tonight they seemed different. Not cold and distant, but bright with promise. Tomorrow they would begin the long journey north, toward mountains and grass and a life built on their own terms. The girl who'd knelt in chains was gone. In her place stood a woman who'd faced down injustice and won, and the lonely drifter who'd given up his gold for a stranger. He'd found something worth more than any metal could ever be. In the soft lamplight of a hotel room in Millfield, two souls scarred by the frontier's cruelty found healing in each other's hope. And that, perhaps, was the greatest justice of all. Judge Edison Brennan's office occupied the second floor of the Millfield courthouse, a sanctuary of law books and legal precedents that stood in stark contrast to the frontier chaos outside. Sam, Margaret, and Daniel sat across from the judge's massive oak desk, morning sunlight streaming through tall windows as they discussed the logistics of the coming trial. Blackwood's hired the best lawyers money can buy, Brennan warned, his austere face grave. 3 of them arrived from San Francisco yesterday. They'll try to muddy the waters, claim the contracts were legitimate business arrangements. Let them try, Margaret said, her voice steady. The truth has a way of cutting through fancy words. The judge allowed himself a small smile. Indeed, but truth needs preparation to shine properly in a courtroom. He spread several documents across his desk. I've been building this case for 2 years. What you've brought me. These records, your testimonies, they're the keystone. But we need more witnesses willing to speak. They're scared, Daniel said quietly. At the ranch, men who complained disappeared. Everyone knew, but no one dared say anything. Fear is Blackwood's greatest weapon, Brennan acknowledged. But courage can be contagious. Your sister's bravery in that crowd. Mr. Morrison's intervention word has spread. People are beginning to hope. As if to prove his point, his clerk knocked and entered. Judge, there's a line of folks outside, families with papers, wanting to file complaints against Blackwood. Send them to Federal Attorney Roosevelt, Brennan instructed. Every story matters. He turned back to his visitors. I'm assigning you rooms at the Cattleman's Hotel, under marshal protection. The trial starts in 2 days. Until then, stay visible but safe. Let the town see that witnesses can stand tall without disappearing. The Cattleman's Hotel was Millfield's finest establishment, a 3-story brick building that catered to wealthy ranchers and railroad executives. Their suite had 2 bedrooms and a sitting area, luxury that made Daniel's eyes widen in wonder. Look, Margaret, he breathed, running his hand over the velvet curtains. It's like those houses in the books, the ones I never thought were real. Sam watched the siblings explore their temporary home, noting how Margaret's protective hovering was beginning to ease. The boy needed normalcy after his ordeal, and she was learning to let him breathe. That afternoon, Theodore Roosevelt arrived to prepare their testimony. The young federal attorney was a bundle of nervous energy, spectacles constantly sliding down his nose as he paced the room firing questions. "They'll attack your credibility," he warned Margaret. "Claim you're a fallen woman who entrapped Morrison for his money. We need to be ready for every ugly insinuation." "I've been called worse," Margaret replied calmly. "Words can't hurt me anymore." Roosevelt turned to Sam. "And you, they'll paint you as a violent drifter who kidnapped Miss O'Brien from a legal arrangement. Your war record, any past troubles, they'll dig it all up." "I've got nothing to hide," Sam said. "Did my duty in the war, worked honest since. If they want to make this about character, I'll match mine against Blackwood's any day." The prosecutor nodded approvingly. "Good. Righteous anger plays well with juries, as long as it's controlled." He adjusted his spectacles again. "Now, let's go through everything from the beginning." They worked until sunset, Roosevelt meticulously documenting every detail. By the time he left, Sam's throat was dry from talking, but they had built an unshakable narrative of exploitation and courage. That evening, they ventured into Millfield's streets. Word of their presence had spread, and people approached constantly, some offering support, others sharing their own stories of Blackwood's cruelty. An elderly Mexican woman pressed a small wooden cross into Margaret's hands, murmuring a blessing. A farmer showed Sam documents proving Blackwood had stolen his land through fraudulent loans. "It's like a dam breaking," Margaret observed as they returned to the hotel. "All these years of silence, and now everyone wants to speak." "Provided we win," Sam reminded her. "If Blackwood walks free, he won't." Daniel's young voice carried surprising steel. "Not with Judge Brennan presiding. The judge is incorruptible. Blackwood tried to bribe him once and nearly got arrested on the spot." That night, Sam found sleep elusive. He stood on the suite's balcony, watching the town settle into darkness. Margaret joined him, wrapped in a shawl against the cool air. "Can't sleep either," she asked. "Keep thinking about those boys at the ranch. How many others are out there, trapped in similar situations? That's why this matters," Margaret said softly. "It's not just about us anymore. If we can show that justice is possible." She trailed off, then continued more firmly. "My mother used to say that evil flourishes when good people stay silent. We're not staying silent." Sam turned to study her profile in the moonlight. The frightened girl in chains had transformed into a woman of remarkable strength. "You've changed," he observed. "We both have." She met his gaze. "The man who bought my freedom expecting nothing in return, he gave me more than liberty. He gave me the courage to fight back." Before Sam could respond, a commotion erupted in the street below. Riders were arriving, a large group carrying torches. Sam's hand went instinctively to his gun, but Margaret touched his arm. "Look closer. Those aren't Blackwood's men." She was right. The riders were families' men, women, even children, arriving from outlying ranches and towns. They dismounted in front of the courthouse, their torches creating a circle of light in the darkness. "What are they doing?" Sam wondered. An old rancher's voice carried up to them. "We stand vigil tonight, and every night until justice is done. Josiah Blackwood took our money, our land, our children, but he won't take our courage, not anymore." More people emerged from buildings, adding their lights to the circle. Soon, over 100 citizens stood in silent testimony to years of oppression and newfound hope. "They're protecting us," Margaret breathed, "making sure nothing happens before the trial." Sam felt something tight in his chest loosen. This was what they'd been fighting for, not just personal justice, but a community's awakening to its own power. The next day brought a flurry of activity. Journalists arrived from Denver, San Antonio, even Chicago. The story of a young woman sold in broad daylight and the drifter who freed her had captured the nation's imagination. Harper's Weekly sent a sketch artist who spent hours drawing Margaret and Sam, despite their discomfort with the attention. Sheriff Garrett, newly appointed after his predecessor fled town, approached them at lunch. "Thought you should know. We arrested 2 of Blackwood's men trying to sneak into town last night. They were carrying enough ammunition to outfit a small army." "Planning to disrupt the trial?" Sam asked. "Or worse, but don't worry. Between my deputies and the federal marshals, we've got this town locked down tighter than a drum." That afternoon, they visited the makeshift camp that had formed outside town. Families who'd lost everything to Blackwood had gathered, sharing resources and stories. Children who'd been freed from the ranch were reunited with parents they hadn't seen in months or years. One boy, no older than 10, recognized Daniel and ran to embrace him. "You kept your promise," he said through tears. "You said help would come, and it did." Margaret knelt beside them, her own eyes wet. "Help came because people like you were brave enough to hope," she told the boy. "Never forget that." An impromptu celebration began. Fiddles appeared. Someone started a cooking fire, and soon the camp rang with music and laughter. It was premature, perhaps, with the trial still to come. But after years of fear, the people needed this moment of joy. As evening approached, Judge Brennan appeared at the camp, his usual stern demeanor softening at the sight of reunited families. "This is why we do this work," he told Sam quietly. "Not for the law books or the precedents, but for moments like these." "Will it be enough?" Sam asked. "Blackwood's lawyers, his money, his connections?" "Justice isn't about money, Mr. Morrison. It's about truth. And truth has a way of prevailing when good people stand together." The judge surveyed the gathering crowd. "Tomorrow, this courtroom will be full of people who found their voices. That's more powerful than any lawyer's trick." That night, the vigil outside the courthouse grew. The circle of light expanded as more citizens arrived, some traveling through the night to be present for the trial. From their hotel window, Sam and Margaret watched the flickering torches, each one representing a story of loss and hope. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" Sam asked. Margaret nodded slowly. "I've been ready since the day my mother died. I just didn't know it until now." She turned from the window. "What about after when this is over?" "Montana's still waiting," Sam said. "Good land, clean water, room to build something lasting." "Together." The word hung between them, carrying weight beyond its simple syllables. Sam had been alone for so long. He'd forgotten what it meant to plan a future that included another person, but looking at Margaret, strong, brave, unwavering, he couldn't imagine any other path. "Together," he confirmed. Daniel appeared in the doorway, book in hand but too excited to read. "There must be 300 people out there now," he reported. "Mrs. Kowalski from the ranch is here, and the Martinez family, and even old Tom who used to sneak us extra water." "They all came for justice," Margaret said. "No," Daniel corrected with wisdom beyond his years. "They came because you showed them it was possible to stand up. You and Sam." As midnight approached, the 3 of them sat together in the sitting room, drawing strength from each other's presence. Tomorrow would bring the confrontation they'd been building toward. Blackwood's money and influence against their truth and the community's courage. Sam cleaned his guns out of habit, though he prayed they wouldn't be needed. Margaret worked on her testimony notes, ensuring every detail was perfect. Daniel finally succumbed to exhaustion, falling asleep with his head on his sister's lap. "He feels safe," Margaret observed softly, stroking her brother's hair. "For the first time in months, he feels safe." "He is safe," Sam assured her. "Both of you are. Whatever happens tomorrow, Blackwood will never touch either of you again." Outside, the vigil continued, torches burning against the darkness like stars brought to earth. The people of Millfield and beyond had found their courage. and tomorrow they would speak truth to power. But tonight, in a hotel room high above the gathered crowd, three people who'd been brought together by cruelty and bound by courage shared a different kind of vigil quiet, intimate, and full of hope for the future they would build together. The trial would come with the dawn, but this moment was theirs alone. The courthouse doors opened at dawn, but the gallery was already full. People had lined up through the night, determined to witness justice delivered. Federal marshals stood at every entrance, their presence a reminder that this was no ordinary frontier trial. Sam, Margaret, and Daniel entered through a side door, escorted by Marshal Wyatt Berry himself.
"Quite a crowd,"
Berry observed.
"Haven't seen anything like this since the war."
The courtroom buzzed with tension. On one side sat Blackwood, flanked by his three San Francisco lawyers in their expensive suits. He'd lost weight during his confinement, his fleshy face now gaunt, but his eyes still held that calculating coldness. On the other side, Federal Attorney Theodore Roosevelt organized his papers with methodical precision, his young face set with determination. Judge Edison Brennan entered, and the room fell silent. His presence commanded respect. Tall, austere, with eyes that seemed to see through pretense to truth itself. "This court is now in session." Brennan intoned, "The United States versus Josiah Blackwood, on charges of fraud, extortion, conspiracy, and attempted murder." The lead defense attorney, a silver-haired man named Hamilton Fish, rose immediately. "Your Honor, we move for dismissal. These charges are based on the testimony of criminals and debtors seeking to escape their legal obligations." "Motion denied," Brennan said flatly. "Proceed with opening statements." Roosevelt stood, adjusting his spectacles. His opening was brilliant, painting a picture of systematic exploitation that had trapped dozens of families in cycles of fraudulent debt. He presented the rescued documents as a roadmap of greed, showing how Blackwood had built an empire on the backs of the desperate. Fish countered with smooth eloquence, portraying Blackwood as a legitimate businessman victimized by debtors who'd conspired to rob him. Margaret, he claimed, had seduced Morrison into helping her escape lawful service. The boys at the ranch were apprentices, learning valuable skills. Lies prettied up in fancy words. Someone muttered from the gallery, earning a sharp rap of Brennan's gavel. Margaret took the stand first. She wore a simple gray dress, her auburn hair pulled back severely, but her natural dignity shone through. Roosevelt led her through her story, her mother's illness, the borrowed money, the escalating debt. "Tell us about the night your mother died," Roosevelt prompted gently. Margaret's voice remained steady. "She went to meet Mr. Blackwood to beg for more time. She never came back. They found her at the bottom of the boarding house stairs the next morning." "And the sheriff's investigation?" "There was none. He said it was an accident. Case closed. But Mother was careful on stairs. Her hip troubled her. She always used the handrail. Always took her time." Fish rose for cross-examination, his manner patronizing. "Miss O'Brien, isn't it true you couldn't pay your legitimate debts?" "A $50 loan became 300 in 6 months. Margaret replied, "No legitimate business charges such interest." "You signed a contract." "I signed nothing. Mr. Blackwood produced a paper with what he claimed was my mother's mark. She could read and write perfectly well, but he said her signature was an X." Fish tried another approach. "You claim you were mistreated, yet you appear quite healthy, well-fed, well-dressed." Margaret's eyes flashed. "These clothes were bought by Mr. Morrison after he freed me. Before that, I spent 3 weeks in chains, fed scraps, sleeping on bare ground. Would you like to see the scars on my wrists, Mr. Fish?" The lawyer retreated, but tried one more attack. "You've been living with Mr. Morrison since he purchased you. Are you his mistress?" The gallery erupted in angry murmurs. Sam half rose from his seat, but Margaret's calm voice cut through the noise. Mr. Morrison has treated me with nothing but respect and honor. He gave up everything he had to free a stranger. If you're trying to make something shameful of human decency, Mr. Fish, then you understand neither shame nor decency. Daniel testified next, his young voice carrying terrible weight as he described life at Blackwood's ranch. When Fish tried to paint the conditions as normal apprenticeship, Daniel's response was devastating. Apprentices get paid, sir. Apprentices can leave. Apprentices don't get whipped for reading books after dark. He looked directly at Blackwood. You told us our family sold us, that we belong to you, but people don't belong to anyone. My sister taught me that, and Sam Morrison proved it. Other witnesses followed in a parade of grief and courage. The banker who'd been forced to forge documents, the former sheriff who admitted taking bribes, family after family describing how small debts had mysteriously multiplied, how those who questioned the accounts had suffered accidents. An elderly woman named Mary Adams took the stand, clutching a worn Bible. My grandson Joseph borrowed $20 for seed corn, she testified. By harvest, Blackwood claimed it was $200. When Joseph protested, his barn burned down. Mysterious fire. The sheriff said Joseph tried to rebuild, but Blackwood took his land for the debt. My grandson works that land now as Blackwood's servant. Sam testified on the second day, describing the scene in Clearwater Junction, the pursuit across the desert, the raid on Blackwood's ranch. Fish tried to paint him as a violent drifter, but Sam's calm recitation of facts was more powerful than any emotional display. Why did you involve yourself? Roosevelt asked. Because I could. Sam replied simply, because walking away would have made me less than human. The most dramatic moment came when Roosevelt introduced a surprise witness, Luther Grant, Blackwood's former foreman, who'd been arrested trying to flee to Mexico. I've been offered a deal, Grant announced, his dead eyes now showing fear. Testimony for reduced charges. I'm taking it. Grant's testimony was damning. He described Blackwood's orders to intimidate families, to forge documents, to arrange accidents for those who resisted. He told of children as young as 8 working in dangerous conditions, of boys who died from exhaustion or untreated injuries. Blackwood called them inventory, Grant said. Said they were replaceable, plenty more where they came from. When Fish desperately tried to discredit his own client's foreman, Grant produced a final piece of evidence, a ledger in Blackwood's own hand, listing children by age and projected years of useful labor. The defense case crumbled. Witnesses refused to testify or contradicted each other. Documents meant to prove legitimate business practices only revealed more fraud. Blackwood himself took the stand briefly, but his arrogant demeanor and obvious lies only hurt his cause. These people owed me money, he insisted. I provided opportunity for them to work off their debts. That's Christian charity. Christian charity doesn't involve chains and whips, Roosevelt observed acidly. Closing arguments brought the packed courtroom to absolute silence. Fish made a valiant effort, arguing about the sanctity of contracts and the dangers of allowing debtors to escape their obligations. But his polished words felt hollow after days of devastating testimony. Roosevelt's closing was masterful. He held up the chains that had bound Margaret, letting them clank in the silence. This is what Mr. Blackwood calls business. These chains, this ledger listing children like cattle, these forged documents. This is his empire. An empire built on suffering, maintained by fear, defended by lies. He turned to the jury. You've heard from dozens of witnesses, families destroyed, children enslaved, a community held hostage by one man's greed. The defense asks you to uphold the sanctity of contracts. I ask you to uphold the sanctity of human dignity. Judge Brennan's instructions to the jury were precise and fair, but his personal feelings showed through. The law recognizes contracts, he said, but it does not recognize fraud. It does not recognize humans as property. It does not recognize might as right. The jury retired for deliberation. The courtroom emptied slowly, people reluctant to go far. Outside, the vigil continued, now swelled to nearly 1,000 people. Sam, Margaret, and Daniel waited in a small room, tension making minutes feel like hours.
What if...
Daniel began. They'll convict, Margaret interrupted firmly.
They have to. The truth was too clear.
But Sam could see her hands trembling slightly. He covered them with his own, offering silent support. 2 hours later, word came the jury had reached a verdict. The courtroom filled instantly, people cramming into every available space. Blackwood sat rigidly, his lawyers whispering last-minute advice he seemed not to hear. Has the jury reached a verdict? Judge Brennan asked. The foreman, a weathered rancher, stood.
We have, Your Honor.
On the charge of fraud, guilty. On the charge of extortion, guilty. On the charge of conspiracy, guilty. On the charge of attempted murder, guilty, Your Honor, guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted. People wept, embraced, shouted jubilation. Blackwood slumped in his chair, finally understanding that his money and influence couldn't buy him out of this. Judge Brennan gavelled for order. Josiah Blackwood, you have been found guilty of crimes that shock the conscience. You perverted the law to enslave free people. You preyed upon the desperate and vulnerable. You built wealth on a foundation of human misery. He paused, his austere face showing rare emotion. I sentence you to 20 years hard labor in federal prison. All assets are to be seized and distributed to your victims. You are permanently enjoined from any form of money lending or labor contracting. As marshals led Blackwood away, he turned one last time. His eyes found Margaret, and for a moment, she saw not the powerful man who'd terrorized a community, but a pathetic figure stripped of everything but his hatred.
This isn't over,
he snarled.
Yes,
Margaret said quietly.
It is.
Outside, the celebration was immediate and overwhelming. The crowd lifted Sam and Margaret onto shoulders, carrying them through the streets. Daniel walked between them, holding their hands, his young face bright with joy and relief. Sheriff Garrett found them later at the hotel. Thought you'd want to know. We've liberated Blackwood's ranch completely. Every child reunited with family or placed in good homes. The other conspirators are being rounded up. This whole sick system is finished. That evening, a community feast sprouted spontaneously in the town square. Tables appeared laden with food. Musicians played. Children who'd been prisoners that morning danced with newfound freedom. Sam and Margaret moved through the crowd, accepting thanks they felt they didn't entirely deserve. We just did what was right, Sam protested to yet another grateful parent. That's exactly why we're thanking you, the man replied.
So few do.
Judge Brennan appeared at their table as the evening wore on. I've been doing this work for 20 years, he said. I've never seen anything quite like this, a community finding its courage. Justice truly served. He handed Margaret an envelope. Your portion of Blackwood's assets, enough to start fresh anywhere you choose. Margaret looked at the envelope, then at Sam and Daniel.
We've already chosen Montana,
a place where the past can't follow. The past always follows, Brennan said gently. But it doesn't have to define the future. As the celebration continued around them, Sam found a quiet moment with Margaret on the courthouse steps, the same steps where desperate people had gathered, where truth had conquered lies.
No regrets?
Margaret asked. None, Sam replied. That gold I lost would have bought things. What I gained instead... He gestured at the celebrating crowd, at Daniel laughing with other children, at her beside him. This is worth more than all the gold in California. Margaret leaned against his shoulder, and they watched the stars appear one by one above Millfield. Tomorrow they would begin the journey to Montana, to build the life they'd dreamed of during desperate nights in the desert. But tonight was for celebration, for watching a community reclaim itself, for knowing that sometimes, not often enough, but sometimes, justice prevails and the chains fall away. In the morning, they would ride north toward new beginnings. But this moment, this victory, this proof that ordinary people could stand against evil and win, this they would carry with them always. The morning of the trial dawned clear and bright, with a crispness in the air that promised change. The Millfield courthouse had been transformed overnight, federal marshals at every entrance, barriers erected to control the expected crowds, and journalists from across the territory setting up their equipment. Sam adjusted his collar nervously as they prepared to enter through the secured side entrance. "You clean up well," Margaret observed, managing a small smile despite the tension. She herself wore a borrowed navy dress, simple but dignified, her hair pinned up in a style that made her look older than her years. Daniel walked between them, clutching a leather folder containing his written testimony. "There must be 500 people out there," he whispered, awed by the crowd that had gathered before dawn. Inside the courtroom, every seat was filled. The gallery buzzed with suppressed energy. Families who'd suffered under Blackwood's reign, townspeople who'd finally found their courage, and observers drawn by the story that had captured national attention. Judge Edison Brennan entered precisely at 9 o'clock, his presence immediately commanding silence. "Be seated," he instructed, his voice carrying the weight of federal authority. "Before we begin, I'll remind everyone that this is a court of law, not a theater. Any disturbance will result in immediate removal." Blackwood sat at the defense table, his expensive suit unable to hide the toll confinement had taken. His 3 lawyers whispered urgently among themselves, shuffling papers and casting worried glances at the prosecution's table where Theodore Roosevelt sat with quiet confidence. "The prosecution may call its first witness," Judge Brennan announced. "The United States calls Miss Margaret O'Brien," Roosevelt declared, rising to his feet. Margaret stood, and Sam caught her hand briefly, a silent gesture of support. She walked to the witness stand with remarkable composure, placing her hand on the Bible to take the oath. In the morning light streaming through the tall windows, she looked both vulnerable and unbreakable. Roosevelt began gently, establishing the facts. "Miss O'Brien, please tell the court how you came to be in Mr. Blackwood's custody." Margaret's voice was clear and steady. "My mother fell ill last winter. The medicine cost more than we had, so she borrowed $50 from Mr. Blackwood. She signed a note, agreeing to pay back $60 within 3 months. "And did she attempt to repay the loan?" "Yes, she had $40 saved by the deadline, but Mr. Blackwood refused partial payment. He said it was all or nothing, and the interest would continue to compound daily." Roosevelt introduced the original loan document as evidence. "What happened next?" "The debt grew impossibly fast. Within weeks, Mr. Blackwood claimed we owed over $100. When Mother questioned the arithmetic, he produced new papers, saying she'd agreed to additional terms." "Did your mother sign these new papers?" "No, she couldn't have. The signatures were forgeries, crude X marks. My mother could read and write perfectly well. She taught school before she married." The lead defense attorney, Hamilton Fish, objected. "Speculation, Your Honor. The witness cannot know who made those marks." "I'll allow it." Brennan ruled. "Continue, Miss O'Brien." Margaret described the night of her mother's death, her voice faltering only slightly. "She went to plead for more time. The next morning, they found her at the bottom of the boarding house stairs. The sheriff barely looked at the scene before declaring it an accident." "And then?" "Mr. Blackwood appeared that afternoon with men. He said the debt passed to me, plus fees for collection and burial costs. The total was now $300. When I couldn't pay, he put chains on me." The prosecutor lifted the actual shackles, letting them clank in the silent courtroom. Several people in the gallery gasped. "These chains!" "Yes, He said I would work off the debt through a contract of indentured service. 7 years. He said maybe more if I caused trouble. Roosevelt led her through the sale in Clearwater Junction. Sam's intervention, their flight across the desert. Margaret spoke with quiet dignity, neither embellishing nor minimizing the truth. When she described the conditions at Blackwood's ranch, where her brother had been held, even hardened frontiersmen in the gallery shifted uncomfortably. Fish rose for cross-examination, his manner patronizing. Miss O'Brien, you admit your family owed Mr. Blackwood money. We owed $50, not $300. But you couldn't pay even the original amount. My mother was sick. Every penny went to keeping her alive. Fish pressed harder. You claim these signatures were forged, but you weren't present when they were made, were you? I know my mother's hand. She was proud of her penmanship. Pride, Fish said smoothly, can be a dangerous thing. Perhaps she was too proud to admit she couldn't write as well as she claimed. Margaret's eyes flashed. My mother taught me to read and write. She kept journals, wrote letters to Ireland. I have samples of her handwriting, if the court wishes to compare. Roosevelt stood quickly. We do have such samples, Your Honor, which we'll introduce as evidence. Fish changed tactics. After Mr. Morrison purchased your contract, where did you go? To safety, to freedom. You traveled together for days, alone in the wilderness, with my brother, whom we rescued from illegal captivity. But you shared camps, meals, intimate moments. The gallery stirred angrily. Margaret's voice remained level. Mr. Morrison treated me with complete respect. He protected us, fed us from his own supplies, and risked his life to save my brother, if you're trying to make something improper from an act of human decency. I'm trying to establish the truth. Fish interrupted. Then the truth is this: I was in chains, being sold like property, until Sam Morrison spent everything he had to free me. Not for any improper purpose, but because he believed it was wrong. That's the kind of man he is. When Daniel took the stand, the courtroom fell utterly silent. His youth made his testimony even more powerful as he described life at Blackwood's ranch in simple, unadorned terms. We worked from before sunrise to after dark, he said. The younger boys in the stables, the older ones in the fields. If you got sick, you worked anyway. If you collapsed, you lost your meal privilege. Roosevelt asked gently, Were you paid for this work? No, sir. Mr. Blackwood said we were paying off our family's debts through labor. He said we were lucky he didn't sell us to the mines in Mexico. Did he threaten that often? Whenever someone complained or tried to run, Tommy Watson tried to escape once. They brought him back and... Daniel paused, looking at the judge. They punished him in front of everyone, as a lesson. Fish tried to shake the boy's testimony. Perhaps you misunderstood. You were learning valuable skills, weren't you? I learned that powerful men can do terrible things if no one stops them, Daniel replied. Is that the skill you mean? Even Fish seemed taken aback by the boy's composure when he pressed about conditions, suggesting they weren't as bad as claimed. Daniel's response was devastating in its simplicity. If it wasn't so bad, why did they need guards? Why the locks? Why did boys cry themselves to sleep calling for their mothers? Sam testified next, providing the connecting narrative. He described finding Margaret in chains, the pursuit across the desert, the raid to rescue Daniel. His military bearing and straightforward manner made him a compelling witness. Why did you involve yourself? Roosevelt asked. You didn't know, Miss O'Brien. You had no obligation. Sam considered the question. I knew what was happening was wrong. In the war, I saw what happens when people are treated as property. I couldn't walk away from that again. It cost you everything you had. No, Sam corrected. It gave me everything that matters. Throughout the day, other witnesses testified. The banker Theodore Judah admitted to forging documents under threat, Former Sheriff Benjamin Wade described taking bribes to ignore complaints. Family after family told their stories of escalating debts, lost lands, and children taken as payment. Mary Cassatt, a widow, told how her husband had borrowed $30 for seed corn. By harvest, Blackwood claimed it was $300. When William protested, "Our barn burned," the sheriff said it was lightning, but there wasn't a cloud in the sky that night. The most dramatic moment came when Luther Grant took the stand. Blackwood's former foreman had been captured trying to flee and offered a deal for his testimony. His revelations painted a picture of systematic criminality that shocked even those who thought they knew the worst. Blackwood kept 2 sets of books. Grant testified, one for show, one real. He'd target families in distress, offer loans at seeming fair terms, then alter the documents later. And if they protested, accidents happened, fires, falls, sickness that came on sudden-like. Grant's dead eyes showed something that might have been remorse. "I carried out his orders. I'm not proud of it." The children at the ranch, what were his plans for them? Work them until they broke or aged out. The broken ones disappeared. The older ones got sent to associates in Mexico, supposedly as apprentices. We never saw them again. When Blackwood himself took the stand, his arrogance proved his undoing. He insisted every contract was legitimate, every debt real, every action legal. But when Roosevelt produced the secret ledgers Grant had revealed, showing children listed as inventory with monetary values assigned, Blackwood's composure cracked. "They owed me money," he shouted. "Their families defaulted. I had every right." "To put children in chains," Roosevelt interrupted. "To work them like slaves, to sell them when they became inconvenient. I am a businessman. I operate within the law." "Then why the forgeries? Why the bribes? Why the accidents that befell those who questioned you?" Blackwood's lawyers tried desperately to repair the damage. But it was too late. The parade of witnesses, the documented evidence, and Blackwood's own admissions had built an insurmountable case. In his closing argument, Fish made a valiant effort to muddy the waters, talking about the sanctity of contracts and the dangers of allowing debtors to escape their obligations. But his polished words felt hollow after the raw truth that had been revealed. Roosevelt's closing was passionate but controlled. He held up the chains again, letting their weight speak. "Josiah Blackwood would have you believe this is business, that these chains, these forged documents, these stolen children represent legitimate commerce. But there is no legitimacy in fraud. There is no commerce in human misery. There is no contract that supersedes basic human dignity." He turned to the jury, 12 men who represented the community's conscience. "You've heard the evidence, you've seen the documents, you've listened to the voices of those who suffered. Now you must speak for justice. Not frontier justice, not vigilante justice, but the justice of law properly applied. The justice that says in America, no man may enslave another, no matter what papers he waves or what debts he claims." Judge Brennan's instructions to the jury were meticulous and fair, but his personal feelings showed in his emphasis. The law recognizes contracts between willing parties. It does not recognize fraud. It does not recognize coercion. It does not recognize human beings as collateral for debt. The jury retired to deliberate in the packed courtroom. People waited in tense silence. Sam, Margaret, and Daniel sat together, hands linked, drawing strength from each other. "Whatever happens," Margaret whispered, "we spoke the truth. The truth will be enough," Daniel said with the faith of youth. 2 hours later, the jury returned. The foreman, a rancher named Andrew Carnegie, who'd lost a nephew to Blackwood's system, stood to deliver the verdict. "On all counts," he said, his voice ringing clear, "we find the defendant guilty." The courtroom erupted. People wept, cheered, embraced strangers. Blackwood slumped in his chair while his lawyers frantically whispered about appeals. Judge Brennan gavelled for order, but his own satisfaction was evident. The sentencing was swift and severe. 20 years hard labor, complete forfeiture of assets, permanent injunction against any form of money lending or labor contracting. As marshals led Blackwood away, he passed close to where Margaret stood.
"You've destroyed me,"
he hissed. She met his gaze steadily. "No, Mr. Blackwood, you destroyed yourself. We just held up the mirror." Outside, the celebration was immediate and overwhelming. The crowd that had maintained vigil throughout the trial now exploded in joy. Sam and Margaret found themselves lifted onto shoulders, carried through the streets like conquering heroes. "We didn't do this alone," Margaret protested, gesturing at the celebrating crowd. "No," agreed Mary Adams, the elderly woman who'd testified. "But you showed us it could be done. That's everything." As night fell over Millfield, bonfires were lit in the square, music played, children danced, and families separated by Blackwood's cruelty were reunited. It was more than a legal victory. It was a community reclaiming itself. Judge Brennan found them late in the evening, his austere face showing rare warmth. "In 30 years on the bench, I've never seen anything quite like this. You've given these people something precious, proof that justice is possible." "What happens now?" Daniel asked. "Now," Brennan said, "we rebuild. Every family Blackwood cheated will receive restitution. Every contract he held is void. Every child he claimed is free." He handed Margaret an envelope. "Your share of his assets, Miss O'Brien. Enough for a new start wherever you choose." Margaret looked at Sam, then at Daniel. "We've already chosen Montana, a place where we can build something clean and good." "Then may you find peace there," Brennan said. "You've earned it." As the celebration continued around them, the three stood together, no longer victims but victors, no longer separate but family. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, a long journey to an uncertain future. But tonight was for joy, for justice served, for the knowledge that sometimes, against all odds, good people can stand against evil and win. The chains that had bound Margaret lay in the courthouse as evidence, but their weight was gone forever. In its place was something infinitely more powerful, the promise of tomorrow, and the courage to claim it. The journey north began 3 days after the trial, on a morning when the sky stretched endlessly blue and the air carried the promise of autumn. A small crowd gathered to see them off, families whose lives had been touched by their courage, townspeople who'd found their voices, and Judge Brennan himself, who broke protocol to wish them well. "You've given us more than justice," Mary Adams said, pressing a small quilt into Margaret's hands. "You've given us hope." Their wagon was loaded with supplies purchased from Blackwood's seized assets, everything needed for starting fresh. Daniel sat between Sam and Margaret on the bench seat, clutching a new book Judge Brennan had given him and barely containing his excitement about the adventure ahead. The first weeks of travel took them through changing landscapes, from desert to grassland, from flat plains to rolling hills. They followed the wagon roads north, joining other families seeking new beginnings in Montana territory. Around evening campfires, they heard stories of gold strikes and cattle empires, of towns springing up overnight and disappearing just as quickly. "Why Montana?" asked Clara Barton, a widow traveling with her 2 daughters to join relatives in Helena. Sam gazed at the northern horizon. "Man I served with in the war wrote me about it. Said the Yellowstone Valley had grass so rich you could raise anything, horses, cattle, dreams." "Dreams," Clara repeated softly. "That's what we're all chasing, isn't it?" They reached the Yellowstone Valley as October painted the cottonwoods gold along the river. The land opened before them like a promise-kept vast grasslands bordered by purple mountains, the river winding silver through it all. Sam pulled the wagon to a stop on a rise, and they sat in awed silence. "It's perfect," Margaret breathed. "It's home," Sam corrected, and the word carried weight none of them had expected. They filed their claim at the land office in the small settlement of Coulson, 160 acres under the Homestead Act, with access to water and sheltered by a grove of cottonwoods. The clerk, a young man named William Clark, helped them through the paperwork. "Building before winter's going to be tough," he warned. "But there's good neighbors out here. Folks help each other." Those neighbors appeared almost immediately. The Kowalski family, Polish immigrants farming the adjacent claim, arrived with tools and strong backs. James and Emma Thompson, ranchers from Texas, brought their crew to help raise the cabin walls. Even a gruff old trapper named Bridger stopped by with advice about surviving Montana winters. "First rule," Bridger announced, stroking his gray beard, "is respect the land. It'll provide for you, but it don't suffer fools. Second rule is neighbors. Out here, we're all we got." The cabin rose quickly, one room to start, with plans for expansion. Margaret proved surprisingly adept at construction, having helped her father repair their cottage in Ireland. Daniel hauled water, mixed mud chinking, and kept everyone's spirits up with his enthusiasm. "Never built anything that was truly ours before," Margaret said one evening, stepping back to admire their progress. "Everything before was temporary," Sam agreed, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "This is permanent." Winter arrived with stunning suddenness. One day they were enjoying mild autumn weather. The next, snow swept down from the mountains like a white curtain. They'd barely finished the roof and installed the wood stove Kowalski had helped them haul from town. Those first winter months tested them. Blizzards that lasted days. Temperatures that froze water in the bucket by the stove. Isolation that pressed in like a weight. They strung rope between the cabin and the small stable they'd built for the horses, knowing that in a whiteout, getting lost between buildings meant death. But there was beauty too. Mornings when the snow sparkled like diamonds. Nights when the northern lights danced across the sky. Evenings by the stove when Margaret read aloud while Sam carved and Daniel practiced his letters. "I want to go to school," Daniel announced one snowy evening. Judge Brennan said education was the key to making sure what happened to us never happens to others. "The nearest school is 15 miles, Margaret said gently. "When spring comes, or we build one here." Sam interrupted. "How many families are homesteading within riding distance 5-6 enough for a school?" The idea took root during those long winter nights. By spring, when the snow finally retreated and the prairie burst into wildflower glory, they'd developed a plan. At the spring gathering, an informal celebration where neighbors helped each other with planting and repairs, Sam proposed it to the community. "We need a school," he said simply. "Not just for our children, but for our future. I'm willing to donate an acre and help build it." The response was immediate. Within a month, a small schoolhouse stood on the corner of their property. Margaret, with her education and natural way with children, became the teacher. Her first class had 8 students, including Daniel, ranging in age from 6 to 14. Summer brought its own challenges and rewards. The garden Margaret planted flourished in the rich soil. Sam's small herd of horses, started with 2 mares purchased in Colson, began to grow. Daniel, when not in school or helping with chores, explored the land with the boundless energy of a boy set free from captivity. It was in late summer that Sam finally asked the question that had been waiting since Millfield. They were sitting by the river, watching the sunset paint the mountains purple, when he turned to Margaret. "I've been thinking," he began, uncharacteristically nervous, "about making things official. You and me, I mean—" Margaret smiled, having wondered when he'd find the courage. "Are you asking me something?" Sam Morrison. He pulled out a simple gold ring, purchased on his last trip to town, but carried for weeks waiting for the right moment. "I'm asking if you'd marry me, not out of obligation or propriety, but because I can't imagine facing another winter, another spring, another anything without you beside me." "Yes," she said simply, then laughed at his surprised expression. "Did you think I'd say no after everything?" They married in the schoolhouse on a September day when the aspens had turned gold on the mountainsides. The ceremony was simple. Reverend Whitman from Coulson officiating, neighbors crowding the small space, Daniel serving as best man with poorly concealed pride. Margaret wore a dress she'd made herself, prairie roses braided into her hair. Sam had never seen anything more beautiful. The wedding dance lasted until midnight. Spilling out of the schoolhouse into the yard, fiddles sang, children ran between the dancing couples, and tables groaned under the weight of dishes brought by every family. It was more than a wedding. It was a community celebrating life triumphing over hardship. "No regrets?" Margaret asked as they finally retired to their cabin. "Now their true home in every sense." "Only one," Sam admitted. "That it took chains and pursuit and trial to bring us together. Wish I'd found you sooner, easier. But then we wouldn't be who we are," Margaret pointed out. "Those trials shaped us, made us strong enough for this life." Their first child arrived with the spring flowers, a daughter they named Sarah, for Sam's lost sister and for new beginnings. Daniel, now 13 and growing tall, appointed himself the baby's fierce protector, reading to her from his ever-growing collection of books. The horse ranch prospered. Sam's reputation for honest dealing in quality animals spread, bringing buyers from as far as Fort Benton. Margaret's school grew too, requiring an addition to handle the children of new homesteaders drawn by stories of the valley's richness. 5 years after their arrival, the community gathered to celebrate the harvest. The schoolhouse overflowed with families sharing food and stories. Children who'd been born in Montana played with those who remembered harder times in harder places. "Look what we've built," Margaret marveled, holding their second child, a son named after Judge Brennan, while watching Sarah toddle after the older children. "We didn't build it alone," Sam reminded her, nodding toward their neighbors and friends. "But we helped start it." Daniel, now 18 and preparing to leave for law school in the East, funded by the community he'd promised to return and serve, raised a toast. "To second chances, to the courage to take them, and to the people who make them possible." As the celebration continued around them, Sam and Margaret stood together, no longer the desperate souls who'd met in violence and fear, but partners who'd built something lasting from the ashes of injustice. The Montana sky stretched endlessly above them, full of stars and possibilities. "Do you ever think about it?" Margaret asked quietly. "What would have happened if you'd walked away that day in Clearwater Junction?" "Every day," Sam admitted. "And every day I'm grateful I didn't." "Please don't leave me. Take me away," Margaret quoted softly. "I was so frightened when I said those words." "And now?" She smiled, gesturing at their children, their friends, their land, their life. "Now I'd say different words. Thank you for not leaving. Thank you for taking me away. Thank you for showing me that home isn't a place you find, it's a place you build, one choice at a time." The party lasted late into the night, but finally, families began drifting home across the prairie. Sam and Margaret lingered outside their cabin, reluctant to end the perfect day. In the distance, coyotes called to each other, and the river murmured its endless song. "We've come so far," Margaret said, leaning into Sam's embrace. "And we've got far still to go," he replied, thinking of the years ahead, the children to raise, the land to tend, the community to nurture. They stood together in the doorway of the home they'd built, looking out at the land they'd claimed not through force or fraud, but through honest work and determination. Behind them lay a past marked by chains and cruelty. Ahead stretched a future bright with promise. The girl who'd been sold in a dusty street was gone, transformed into a woman of strength and purpose. The drifter who'd given up his gold for a stranger had found riches beyond measure, and the boy who'd been held captive now stood ready to fight injustice with law instead of guns. This was what freedom looked like. Not just the absence of chains, but the presence of choice, community, and love. In the end, that's what Sam Morrison had purchased with his gold that day in Clearwater Junction, not a person, but a possibility. And from that possibility, they'd built a life worth living. The Montana stars wheeled overhead, eternal and unchanging, witness to all the dreams that had died and been born beneath them. But on this night, in this place, they shone on something rare and precious. A happy ending earned through courage, paid for in hope, and built to last. Thank you so much for listening to this story from the American frontier. I hope Sam and Margaret's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine while sharing it with you. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect across the miles, just like the characters in our story connected across the vast Montana territory. If you enjoyed this tale of courage, justice, and love in the Old West, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 for more authentic frontier stories. Don't forget to like this video and hit the hype button to help more people discover these powerful tales of hope and redemption from America's past. Until we meet again on the trail, partners.